What if one simple morning at a small-town diner could change everything? A struggling single dad walks in with his little girl, just like any ordinary day. But in an unexpected twist, she runs to a stranger's table, looks the woman straight in the eye and calls her mom. Was it just an innocent mistake, or a hidden connection that fate quietly arranged? Before we dive into this heartwarming story of love, second chances, and the little girl who brought two lonely souls together, if you believe in the magic of kindness and stories that touch the heart, don't forget to subscribe and join us for more inspiring tales like this one. Now, let's begin the story of how a little girl's question at a diner turned strangers into family. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the faint aroma of bacon sizzling on the griddle as Elias Carter pushed open the door to Whitman's diner. The small bell above jingled in its familiar, comforting way. Sunlight streamed through the wide windows, casting a warm glow over the checkered floor and faded leather booths. "Morning, Gus," Elias greeted, nodding to the elderly man wiping down the counter. Gus Whitman glanced up, offering his usual grin. "Morning, Eli. The usual table?" Elias gave a half smile and gently squeezed the hand of his daughter, Lila, who stood beside him, clutching a sketch pad almost as large as herself. Yep, booth by the window." Lila didn't say a word but gave Gus a shy wave before hurrying to the corner booth. It was their booth, the one with the worn wooden tabletop right beneath a window that overlooked the sleepy main street. For Elias, this booth was more than routine. It was a sanctuary carved out between shifts and life's daily grind. He slid into the seat across from his daughter, watching as she immediately opened her sketch pad and began doodling. Always the same, swirls, little stick figures, and more. Recently, faces with big, kind eyes. "Want the pancakes today or scrambled eggs, sweet pea?" he asked. Lila barely looked up. "Pancakes and apple juice." Elias chuckled softly, signaling Gus without needing to say a word. Gus knew their order by heart after all these years. The diner felt timeless. There was something about the hum of quiet conversations, the clink of utensils, and the occasional creak of the front door that grounded Elias. Out there, life felt like a series of uphill climbs, bills, 2 jobs, the lingering ache of losses he rarely spoke about, but in here there was rhythm, something dependable, and Lila. He glanced at her. She had his unruly dark hair, but her eyes, those wide, curious hazel eyes, were something else entirely. She had arrived in his life when the world felt like it was folding in on itself. A tiny, fragile being, abandoned at the doorstep of a church, and somehow, by some twist of fate, she ended up in his arms. "Daddy," Lila said suddenly, tapping her pencil against the table. "What did Mommy look like?" Elias froze. It wasn't the first time she'd asked, but each time it hit him like a blow to the chest. How did you explain to a 6-year-old that you never knew her biological mother? That all the answers she wanted were hidden in shadows? He cleared his throat, forcing a smile. "She had a beautiful heart, kiddo. That's what I like to think." Lila tilted her head thoughtfully, then turned back to her sketch pad. Her pencil moved faster now, more deliberate. Gus arrived with their plates, setting them down gently. "One day," he said, lowering his voice as he caught Elias's eye, "she's gonna surprise you." Elias nodded silently, not trusting himself to speak. As they ate, the door jingled again, and a tall woman entered. She moved with quiet grace, her tailored coat neatly buttoned, sunglasses perched carefully atop her head. Elias didn't pay her much attention at first, but something about the way she glanced around the room, like she didn't quite belong, yet was searching for something, caught his eye. She slid into the corner booth, furthest from everyone else, alone. Lila peeked up from her drawing and watched the woman for a moment, curious. "Daddy," she whispered, "that lady looks like she's sad." Elias followed her gaze but said nothing. The woman ordered coffee, her voice low, almost guarded. There was a stillness about her, an air of someone carrying too much weight in a world that had no idea. Elias recognized that look. He saw it in the mirror some mornings. Minutes passed. The diner returned to its gentle rhythm. Suddenly, as if pulled by invisible strings, Lila slid out of her seat, sketchpad in hand, and began walking toward the woman's booth. "Lila," Elias called softly, startled. "Where are you going, honey?" But she didn't answer. She walked straight up to the woman clutching her drawing. Elias stood halfway, unsure whether to intervene. The woman looked up as Lila approached, confusion flickering across her face. "Hi," Lila said simply, holding out the sketchpad. "Are you my mommy?" The diner went silent. Elias's heart slammed in his chest. He moved quickly, reaching his daughter's side. "Lila, sweetheart." The woman's expression shifted. Her eyes widened, a sharp breath caught in her throat. She stared at the little girl before her, something unreadable flashing across her face. Elias knelt beside Lila, gently guiding her back. "I'm sorry," he said to the woman, voice tight. She sometimes imagines things." But the woman shook her head slowly, her voice soft and broken. "No, it's quite all right." She looked at Lila one last time, eyes glistening with something Elias couldn't name. The moment lingered, heavy and inexplicably charged, before Elias coaxed Lila back to their booth. She looked down at her drawing, quiet now. The woman paid for her coffee, but didn't leave immediately. She sat for a long while, fingers tracing the rim of her cup, her gaze occasionally drifting toward Elias and Lila. Gus came by, leaning down toward Elias. "Funny thing about kids," he murmured. "They see things we don't." Elias could only nod, unable to shake the strange weight settling over his chest. Outside, the morning sun continued streaming in, but something about the air felt different. Like the quiet gears of fate had just shifted. Vivienne Alden sat motionless in the corner booth, long after the man and his daughter returned to their seats. The lukewarm coffee before her remained untouched. Her manicured fingers traced circles on the rim of the cup, but her mind was elsewhere, still, replaying the little girl's question like an echo she couldn't silence. "Are you my mommy?" She had walked into Whitman's diner this morning simply to escape the sterile silence of her penthouse, escape the ceaseless buzz of boardrooms, investment meetings, and her assistant's constant notifications. But what she hadn't expected was the tiny voice of a stranger's child pulling at something raw and buried deep inside her. She took a steadying breath, eyes flickering to the booth by the window where the man, Elias, she overheard Gus call him, was, now murmuring softly to the little girl, brushing her curls back tenderly. There was something about the two of them that felt untouched by the cynicism of the world Vivienne had spent decades navigating. Something simple, something she hadn't felt in years. Vivienne reached instinctively for her purse, pulling out her sunglasses, though there was no sun in the diner. A reflex. Shields up. Always. Before she could rise, Gus approached quietly, setting a fresh pot of coffee on her table. "Everything all right, Miss?" he asked gently, eyes kind but perceptive. She forced a faint smile, the kind she'd perfected, in corporate galas and fundraising events. "Yes, thank you. Just caught off guard." Gus nodded, wiping his hands on his apron. Kids have a way of doing that, especially ones like Lila. Vivienne glanced once more at the little girl. "Lila," he'd said. Such an old-fashioned, sweet name. The child was now back to her sketchpad, her small brow furrowed in concentration, as if the strange encounter moments ago hadn't happened at all. "Is she—" Vivienne hesitated, realizing how intrusive her question might sound. "Is she his biological daughter?" Gus gave a knowing shrug. "Eli doesn't talk much about it. Good man, works hard, raises that little girl like she's his own blood." Something in Gus's voice softened. She's had a tough start, that one, but she's got a light in her, lights up the whole diner some days. Vivian swallowed the lump forming in her throat. She shouldn't care. She shouldn't ask more. But against her better judgment, her curiosity tugged at her. How old is she? She asked quietly. 6, Gus replied. Then added, funny, she's been drawing mothers in her sketchbook lately. Eli never says much, but, well, sometimes kids sense the gaps before anyone else does. Vivian nodded politely, her throat suddenly tight. She rose, leaving a bill on the table, more than enough to cover the coffee. She gathered her coat, casting one last glance at the little girl who had so casually called her Mom. Outside, the cool air hit her face, sharp and refreshing. She stood for a moment on the sidewalk, letting the morning sounds of the small town swirl around her. Cars humming by, a distant dog barking, the rustle of leaves underfoot. Vivian Alden wasn't used to being unsettled. Her life was measured, controlled, calculated down to every minute. She had built walls so high around herself that not even scandal nor heartbreak could shake them. And yet, one question from a stranger's child had splintered something fragile inside her. Inside the diner, Elias watched the woman leave. There was something unmistakably elegant about her. The precise way she carried herself, the guarded expression she wore like armor. He sighed, returning his focus to Lila, who had finished her pancakes and was now adding bold strokes to her. Latest sketch, sweetheart, he said gently. Why did you ask that lady if she was your mom? Lila didn't look up. She looked like the lady in my dreams, she murmured, as if it were the simplest explanation in the world. Elias felt a pang of something sharp. Dreams? Lila nodded, finally glancing at him. Sometimes I dream about a lady. She has the same eyes. She's always smiling at me. Elias swallowed, unsure how to respond. He knew Lila was old enough to start asking questions, and every time she did, it felt like a slow unraveling inside him. She was just a nice lady having coffee, he said quietly, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. You already have me, remember? Lila smiled faintly, but Elias could see she wasn't fully convinced. He stared at her drawing. The lady she sketched bore a striking resemblance to the woman who'd just walked out. Coincidence, he told himself. Kids latch onto images, faces. It didn't mean anything, but the heaviness lingered. Vivian drove through the winding streets back, toward the edge of town, her mind distant, hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. She wasn't one to believe in signs or fate. Her world was numbers, decisions, strategy, but today felt different. The little girl's eyes haunted her. That question, asked so innocently, had stirred something she hadn't dared touch in decades. Vivian's foot hovered over the brake as she neared the turnoff to her estate. Instead, she kept driving past the gates, past the manicured lawns, continuing until she reached the overlook that gave a sweeping view of the valley below. She parked, cutting the engine, and stared out at the horizon, the sun climbing higher. Her phone buzzed relentlessly in her purse. Emails, calendar reminders, assistants needing her input. She ignored it all. For the first time in years, she wondered if the life she'd built, brick by brick, might be missing something essential, and for reasons she couldn't quite name yet, she knew she'd find herself back at that diner again soon. The next morning unfolded like every other. Sunlight peeking through thin curtains, the distant hum of delivery trucks rolling past the apartment complex, the familiar clatter of Elias Carter preparing Lila's breakfast. Routine, steady, safe. But for the first time in months, Elias felt the undercurrent of something unsettled. He watched Lila at the kitchen table, swinging her legs rhythmically beneath her chair, her fingers gripping a crayon as she worked on yet another drawing. Always faces, always women with kind, open eyes, Yesterday's moment at Whitman's diner lingered in the corners of his mind like a shadow he couldn't shake. Lila had asked strangers questions before. Children her age were naturally curious, but there was something about the way she'd approached that woman, direct, certain, as if some deeper instinct had nudged her forward. Elias ran a hand over his face, trying to shake the gnawing tightness in his chest. He couldn't afford distractions, not when bills loomed, shifts waited, and raising Lila required all his focus. He crouched beside her, gently touching her shoulder. "Ready for the diner, kiddo?" Lila beamed, hopping off the chair, clutching her sketchpad close like it contained secret worlds only she could unlock. Whitman's diner buzzed with its usual quiet energy when they arrived. The bell chimed overhead and Gus greeted them with his easy smile. "Mornin', Eli, Lila." Gus nodded, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Morning, Gus," Elias returned, guiding Lila to their usual booth. She climbed in immediately, flipping, open her sketchpad as though yesterday had never happened. But Gus leaned over slightly, lowering his voice as Elias passed him at the counter. "She's not here today," he murmured, a twinkle in his eye. Elias frowned slightly. "Who?" "The lady from yesterday," Gus clarified, as if reading his thoughts. "Thought maybe you were wondering." Elias gave a brief shake of his head, lips twitching into something close to a smile. "Just curious, I guess." But truthfully, curiosity wasn't the right word. It was something deeper, something like unease. He settled across from Lila, sipping the coffee Gus had already poured. The diner felt as familiar as always. Murmured conversations, the faint strains of classic rock playing from the jukebox, the occasional clang from the kitchen, but Elias couldn't help glancing at the empty corner booth. A strange hollowness settled in his chest. Several blocks away, Vivian Alden stood in front of the mirror, buttoning the last clasp on her tailored jacket. She adjusted the lapel, regarding her reflection carefully. Polished, controlled, impeccable. Yet no amount of designer fabric could quiet the restless energy in her chest. She should be at a board meeting. She should be reviewing investment reports or coordinating with her legal team. That's where she belonged, inside the sharp, defined lines of power and precision. Instead, her thoughts drifted back to a little girl's wide, expectant eyes. Vivian exhaled slowly and grabbed her keys. Against her better judgment, she was heading back to Whitman's diner. When she pushed open the door, the familiar chime rang out, and the scent of bacon and coffee enveloped her immediately. Gus glanced up from behind the counter, recognition flickering in his eyes. Without a word, he gestured toward the corner booth she'd occupied yesterday. Vivienne nodded, sliding into the seat, but her eyes didn't rest on the menu. They drifted to the booth by the window, the one with the man and the little girl. Lila spotted her almost instantly, her face lighting up. She tugged at Elias's sleeve urgently. "Daddy, she's back!" Elias's shoulders stiffened slightly before he turned to see Vivienne sitting there poised, yet seemingly uncertain. He glanced down at Lila, who was already slipping from her seat. "Lila, wait," he began, but it was too late. She approached Vivienne's table, sketchpad clutched to her chest. "Hi," Lila said shyly, standing beside the booth. Vivienne looked up, something softening in her expression. "Well, hello again." Lila glanced over her shoulder at her father, then leaned closer. "Can I show you something?" Vivienne nodded, and Lila opened her sketchpad, flipping to the latest page. It was a drawing, not messy like typical children's doodles, but surprisingly deliberate. A woman's face. Large eyes, gentle smile, dark hair cascading down. Vivienne stared at it, her throat tightening inexplicably. "That's you," Lila said simply. Vivienne blinked, unable to summon a reply. For years, she'd been painted in newspapers, featured, in magazines, sketched by corporate caricaturists, but never had she seen herself rendered so innocently, so earnestly. "Why did you draw me?" Vivienne asked, her voice quieter than usual. Leela shrugged as if the answer was obvious. "You look like someone who belongs." Vivian's breath caught. Of all the boardrooms, galas, estates she'd moved through in her life, she wasn't sure she'd ever heard words so disarming. Before she could respond, Elias approached, his smile apologetic, but tinged with something unreadable. "I hope she's not bothering you," he said, gently taking Leela's hand. "Not at all," Vivian answered quickly, surprising herself with how much she meant it. There was an awkward pause, an unspoken something hanging between them. Gus called out from behind the counter, breaking the tension. "Coffee, Miss?" Vivian nodded. "Yes, please, and maybe a slice of that pie today." Elias glanced at her curiously, then back at Lila, who was already tugging him toward their booth. As he sat down, Elias caught Vivian's eye briefly. She offered the faintest smile, and just like that, the weight pressing on Elias's chest felt a little lighter. Across town, the world continued spinning, the stock market's deadlines daily grind, but inside the modest walls of Whitman's diner, something invisible had shifted. A delicate thread had formed, barely visible, quietly weaving its way between three unlikely souls. And none of them yet understood how tightly it would bind them. Vivian Alden stood at the grand window of her penthouse. The city skyline stretched before her like an intricate painting. Twinkling lights danced across glass towers, but her eyes were distant, unfocused, tracing invisible lines beyond the horizon. Her fingers gripped the edge of her whiskey tumbler, though she hadn't touched the drink. The echo of a little girl's voice still lingered in her ears. "You look like someone who belongs." It had been years since anyone, let alone a child, had spoken to her without pretense, without calculation. The words had cut past the walls she'd spent decades constructing. With a sigh, Vivian walked away from the window, setting the glass down untouched. She crossed the sleek living room, the silence pressing in on her. The polished floors, the expensive furniture, the immaculate perfection, it all felt sterile tonight. On the mahogany bookshelf near her desk sat an old leather-bound photo album, mostly forgotten. Her hand hovered over it, hesitant, before pulling it free. She carried it to the couch, sat down, and flipped open the worn cover. The first photo stared back at her. A younger version of herself, no more than 18, smiling stiffly beside. Her parents at a summer estate. Her mother's sharp eyes, her father's formal stance. Even in still images, the weight of expectation seemed palpable. She turned the page slowly. There, nestled among neatly arranged snapshots, was a picture she rarely allowed herself to look at. A hospital room. A bundled infant swaddled in soft, pink. Vivian herself, barely recognizable, exhausted, tear-streaked, but holding the baby like she was the most precious thing in the universe. Her daughter, unplanned, unwanted by her family, quickly erased from public view. Vivian swallowed hard, fingers brushing over the photo. She had named her Hannah, but that name, like everything else about her baby, had been lost when her parents arranged the adoption before she'd even left. The hospital. She never knew what became of her. Until yesterday, that chapter had stayed tightly locked away, boxed up in favor of the life she'd built. Successful, polished, controlled. But now the little girl at the diner, Lila, had stirred. Something she thought long dead. Those wide hazel eyes, that inexplicable sense of familiarity. It was foolish, she told herself. Coincidence. But no matter how she tried, she couldn't quiet the gnawing inside her chest. Her phone vibrated sharply against the coffee table, pulling her back. She glanced at the screen. Margot Lee. Vivian hesitated, then answered. "Viv?" Margot's voice came warm, unhurried. "I've been trying to get a hold of you all day. Everything all right?" Vivian exhaled slowly. "I'm fine, just distracted." "That's not like you." Margot paused, then added gently, "Talk to me." Vivian's lips pressed tightly. Margot had been her closest friend for decades, the one person who had known her before.